Research shows communities of color nationwide are overburdened by environmental hazards. Black people specifically face far greater exposure to every type of pollution source compared to other demographic groups. Studies have long supported this fact, and President Biden campaigned passionately on this particular issue, including in Flint, Michigan, just days before the 2020 election.
The impacts on climate too often fall disproportionately on poor communities and communities of color. We're going to make sure communities benefit from the hundreds of billions of federal investment in infrastructure and climate change we're going to do as a consequence of the change in the structure.
Friday, the White House sought to deliver on that campaign promise, unveiling a screening tool designed to identify disadvantaged and polluted communities all across America. The tool will help steer billions of federal dollars from climate and clean energy and environmental programs to places in the country that need them the most. But the tool leaves out one major critical factor: race. A Biden administration official told reporters that excluding race will make projects less likely to draw legal challenges and will be easier to defend. So joining me now to discuss is Michael Mann. He's a distinguished professor and director of the Earth Science Center at Penn State University and author of The New Climate War. Okay, first off, what are your thoughts on the new White House screening tool? Will it make a significant impact on protecting those most vulnerable communities, those frontline communities from these climate change hazards?
Yeah, thanks, Zerlina. It's good to be with you. And, you know, it's a positive development. I mean, it's a useful tool in addressing, the impact that, wealth and other factors have, and addressing the fact that it's those with the least resources, the least well-off, and often minority communities who are suffering the worst consequences of climate change. So I'm glad that they're trying to address that. But there is sort of a blind spot there, as you've alluded to, because while, race and income and other factors are sometimes correlated, and I think their argument is, well, we're accounting for race by accounting for things like income. That doesn't quite account for the full range of, prejudice and the impact that has had. Policies like redlining that aren't always just about economics. They're not always just about wealth and income. They're about excluding certain communities, for example, from areas that are less prone to flooding or extreme heat in the summer. So I think you do need to include race explicitly when you're accounting for, this sort of environmental risk.
What are the downsides of excluding race as a factor? I mean, do you think that will exclude significant portions of the country that need this assistance? Or do you think that, enough may be captured and that's why they ended up in this position? I mean, how do you think they got to a place where a tool would exclude race, even though I think the legal challenges piece that's like a separate question? Will they capture enough communities with this tool if they exclude the race as a factor?
Yeah, so it'll be incomplete. I mean, the scientist in me, the statistician in me understands that if there's a predictive variable, and we know that there is an impact of race, as we said, discrimination, redlining, that isn't going to be captured by these other variables. So from a purely scientific standpoint, it's an insufficient model. It's not accounting for all of the variables that matter. That's me as a scientist. Me as a human being, it's troubling, once again, that those who have suffered discrimination and the worst consequences of climate change are not really, are still not being given the resources that they need to contend with the impacts that they're already dealing with.
So what do they need in order to provide environmental equity in those particular frontline communities?
Yeah, well, we need assistance, first of all. We need financial assistance to those communities for several reasons. First of all, some of it is, frankly, just reparation. They've suffered the worst consequences historically, and there needs to be reparation for that. But they also have the least wealth, the least resilience, the least ability to cope with some of these devastating consequences we're seeing: flooding from superstorms, extreme heat. All of these very damaging and dangerous extreme weather events that we're now seeing, they're suffering the concept, people in urban environments, but in particular people of color, minority populations are suffering the worst consequences. They need to be provided with the resources to deal with that. And thus far, they're not. The administration has the right idea. I think they want to do the right thing. Obviously, we're going to need to codify these sorts of policies in legislation. And here again, of course, we run into this problem that we don't even have all of the Democrats on board with passing basic climate legislation, Build Back Better, and the other provisions that'll help folks.
So let's talk about that for a second before we go. I mean, Build Back Better has been long debated. Obviously, one of the holdups is Joseph Manchin, who receives a lot of money from the industry that wouldn't want many of the climate change provisions that are included in that bill passed into law. I mean, speak to that dynamic and how hard you think it will be to get over that hurdle so that climate change provisions and legislation can actually get passed, because it's not like climate change is going to end tomorrow unless we actually address it. It doesn't disappear.
Yeah. Yeah, if Joe Manchin didn't exist, you'd have to invent him, right? Because here you have a coal state Democrat with personal holdings in the coal industry and connections to the coal industry who drives, Maserati, I believe, and owns a yacht,
yes.
And seems to be indifferent to, the suffering of the very people that he is supposed to be representing in these communities in West Virginia. I don't know what the solution is. You need 50 votes right now. We don't have them because of both Manchin and Kristen Sinema. It speaks to the importance of turning out in these midterm elections. We need huge Democratic turnout in these midterm elections, because what we see is that even when you win in presidential years, if you don't turn out, if your voters don't turn out in the off-term and midterm elections, then you're stuck with the sort of situation we have right now with a divided Congress that isn't able to move on this essential legislation. The answer is people turn out and vote on these issues and get the representation that you deserve, that we all deserve in Congress.
He does, in fact, drive a Maserati, and he lives, technically it's a houseboat because he lives on the yacht. So it's not like he has a house and then he has a yacht, or a yacht for his yacht like Jeff Bezos. Just has one yacht that he lives on, but he does, in fact, drive a Maserati. Michael Mann, thank you so much.
Have to make it up.
I know. It is quite amusing. Thank you again for being here.